Hello! Today I thought I would bring you another in my books that have ... series. For those of you who haven't been watching this, I will link the playlist down below if you want to check it out. Basically, this is a series where I talk about all the different books that have kind of changed me in the various different sort of formats of the video. I've really enjoyed making this series so far actually. It's a nice excuse to talk about some things that are a little more personal and the way that books have affected me, rather than just my opinions on them or a little brief synopsis of what they're about. It's quite nice to have a little bit more of a personal discussion, because I think as bookish people we are always turning to books and they have a major impact on who we are as people, which leads me nicely on to my subject for today, which is going to be books that have helped me through hard times. At the start of the year I listened to the audiobook for Matt Haig's Reasons to Stay Alive, and he speaks in that a lot, and what I liked best about that audiobook was the fact that Matt Haig often refers to how much literature saved him and how much literature was a staple when he was going through these hard times. It was something that he knew he could come back to, and it really helped him through, and I think books in a way help all us bookish people through. Anyway, without further ado, I'm going to talk about 5 books that have been with me at 5 difficult times in my life. So let's get straight into it with The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. Now, I will go into this saying that this is probably not a book that would appeal to me now. I think there are still theories in it that I turn to quite often, but for the most part it's a bit too spiritual for where I am at my life now. But when I picked this up when I was 18 years old, it was exactly what I needed, and it was a very pivotal book, and it started me on a kind of whole spiritual journey that admittedly I didn't pursue later than my teen years, but it helped me through some very difficult times. So, little bit of backstory. When I was about 18 years old, I went to live with my nan for a month. She lived quite a way away from me, and it was because I was kind of in a bad place, as I think a lot of us get in teenage years. I was kind of hanging out with people who weren't helpful to me. They put me down a lot, and sort of getting into some bad situations and bad habits. And I went to stay with my nan to just get rid of all that and clear my head and find a place where I could be peaceful and be me again, because I found that I was really conflicted and anxious and just tight and unhappy all the time. So I went to stay with my nan, and I did take a whole load of reading material, because pretty much for the duration of that month I just read. But I ran out of everything, and I picked up The Power of Now, which was a book that a lot of my friends had been reading and sort of talking about, and it never overly appealed to me, but I thought I would pick it up and give it a go. And I think because I was feeling really empty and low, and I had no self-esteem and I wasn't happy, this book really helped me through that experience, and I think it really picked me up. I think this book is something that I will never forget from that period of my life. Basically, this is a kind of spiritual guidance book, but it looks at some really interesting theories, and it almost approaches spirituality from a psychological standpoint, which to this day I enjoy. In terms of that, it looks at spirituality not as in, you know, I think he says this referring to God, it's kind of just a all-inclusive word, you know, you can replace it with whatever you want to make it feel like it fits your life. So I think this probably might appeal to people who aren't overly spiritual, but it could seem a bit preachy at times. But for the most part, this talks about issues like the ego, and kind of goes at it from quite a Freudian point of view, and talks about the discrepancy between the ego and who we want to be, and the fact that, you know, the discrepancy between the two is the sort of source of unhappiness. And I think there's a lot of sense in that theory. And there are also theories in here about pain bodies and the sort of victimization that we put on ourselves, and the idea that we get into these situations where we kind of relate our character to our misery, and I think all of us do that at times. So yeah, this book really lifted me in a time when I needed filling up. It filled my soul and it made me very happy. Then about a year after that I moved altogether, so my whole family moved to be closer to my nan, and even though it was something that I really wanted, and it was actually something that came about after I had stayed with my nan, so in a way these books are quite intertwined, but even though it was something that I really wanted and that I think I needed, it was still a very daunting time at 19 years old to leave everybody that I knew behind. And one book that I can really remember from that period is Eat, Pray, Love by Elizabeth Gilbert. Now this is a book that I've actually returned to since. I returned to it about last year or the year before, and I didn't actually enjoy it, so that's interesting. Well, I did enjoy it, but the spiritual stuff is, again, in this there is quite a lot of spirituality, because she goes to stay in a monastery in India, yeah, I found the spirituality in this was quite preachy as well. But I think this is a really good one for women who are having a hard time. Obviously, this is Elizabeth Gilbert's memoir about the process of leaving her husband and then going travelling for a year. But I think it applies for loss that's more than just the loss of love. I think this is a good one to help you realise how you can work through a problem. For me, you know, my problem, my loss, it wasn't heartbreak, but it was a loss of the way of life that I had thought I had built up for myself. And so this book was a real comfort for me, and I really, really enjoyed it at the time. Then we jump forward a fair few years to The Luminaries by Eleanor Catton. Now, I read this 2 years ago, and I raved about it on BookTube. I really, really enjoyed it. The reason that I'm putting this book in here is because I read this book. This is the first book I read after giving up my job that I'd had for 5 years, and I gave up that job not having another job to go into. I had saved up enough to pay my rent and bills for 6 months, and it was a very, very scary time. It was exciting and it was a happy time for the most part, but there was also a lot of fear there, and I think there was a lot of uncertainty, and it was kind of bittersweet because I also missed all the people I worked with, and I went from a very people-facing role to being on my own all day every day. And this book was hugely comforting through that time. I think because it's so thick, that's probably the main reason that I found it such a comfort. But it's like a blanket. So this is like a kind of mystery book set in New Zealand during the gold rush, and it's just fantastic. I would highly, highly recommend it. I think the way I described it at the time was that it was like a soap opera in a book, and it really is, and it's like a blanket that you can just cover yourself with, and it's just this world of deceit and treachery and horrible characters that are just so thrilling to read about, and it's such pure escapism, I would say. Oh, I really, really enjoyed it, and as I say, it really helped me through that period of uncertainty by just being this constant. I think, as I say, because it is so thick, it was just this constant reassurance that I could come back to, and yeah, I think it really, really deserves its place on this list. Then we jump forward another few months to Artful by Ali Smith. When I first came up with the idea for this video, this was the book that I knew I wanted on this list. Not because it was an amazing book or because it blew me away. It was an okay book. I think I gave it 4 stars. But because of how I started reading this book. So about 4 months after giving up my job, my partner and me split. So I had to move back home, and it kind of threw my plans because I had a very set plan about obviously my 6 months of unemployment. That to happen about halfway through, it wasn't ideal, and it was a very difficult time, not in terms of, I think it was the right thing, and I knew at the time that it was the right thing, but it was very difficult to deal with and to adjust. I kind of left in a rush, and I left all my things, and the day after I moved back home, I went back to my old house and I picked up all my things, and obviously the first thing I started packing was my books because, you know, priorities. And Ali Smith's Artful was one of the books that I picked up to pack that first day, and when I got to the point where I just couldn't bear to pack up anything else, I sat down on the sofa waiting for a lift back, and I started reading this, and I think it really spoke to me at the time because this is kind of a fictionalised version of an essay that Ali Smith gave. It kind of gives you the outline of the essay but in a fictional shell, as it were, and the fictional shell is that this woman has gone into her husband's study. I think her husband has died. I can't be sure because it's just got quotes on the back rather than a blurb, but I think her husband has died, and she goes into his study for the first time and picks up a book off his shelf and starts reading it and kind of thinking about the book in terms of her relationship, and then thinking about her relationship with art. And to have that be something that I picked up while I was packing up my life with somebody, it just seemed very prevalent, and I think this was a book that really helped me through that first hard day, because I literally just sat down and read this. It's Ali Smith, so the writing is really large and there's not much to a page, so it was easy to read it in one day. And I think it kind of helped me through a day that I probably didn't want to pay attention to. So this book had to have a place here. And then jumping forward just a few months, again, we have Nobody Belongs Here More Than You by Miranda July. Probably about 2 months after I moved home, maybe a little bit less actually, it might have only been a month. it was the booktubeathon, which is where you read 7 books in 7 days. And again, in an attempt to kind of distract myself, and because I had moved back home and I wanted to sit in my room and just not have to deal with socialisation for a week, I decided to take part, and Miranda July's No One Belongs Here More Than You was one of the books that I picked up for that period, and it was a short story collection that really spoke to me. I don't know how much I like Miranda July as a writer. I've read her novel The First Bad Man since reading this, and it was really quite strange and just a bit not really my cup of tea. But I think reading this, the thing that Miranda July does is that she cuts to the quick quite well. For example, let me read you a quote that I underlined at the time. We were anxious to begin our life as people who had no people. And I think it's something Miranda July does again and again. She cuts to the quick of feelings and emotions, and I think that was exactly what I needed at the time. And to have somebody who was explaining emotions that I was feeling was really reassuring and really comforting. And I leant on this book a lot that summer and kind of reread it quite a few times just to kind of give myself that comfort and that feeling that I wasn't alone in what I was experiencing. So again, I wanted to mention this one. I don't know if I would necessarily recommend it, but I think if you're going through a hard time, perhaps reading this in quite quick concession could be a good idea. So those are the 5 books that have helped me through hard times. Obviously there have been many other books that have helped me through many hard times, but when I think about the most, I suppose, hard times and also pivotal moments of my life, these are the books that kind of saw me through those periods. Please let me know down below if there are any books that have helped you through the hardest experiences in your life, and I will see you next time. Bye.